Awesome. Yeah, I just got my phone just popped up an article that says that yesterday morning at 8:29 a.m., in case you were wondering, there was 3 semi-trucks that left carrying pallets of boxed and refrigerated vaccines leaving from central Michigan. So the vaccine is starting to be distributed. I don't know who's getting it. Probably, first responders and healthcare workers because Lord knows they need it.
I saw a projected schedule that, like healthcare workers and first responders in December, January, and then essential workers, I think. But I think it's going to vary by state.
Right. Well, and I had heard that they're also looking at, in addition to essential workers, they're talking about doing people involved in education, like schools and stuff as well. Yeah, because I know a lot of colleges became, hotbeds for it. That seems like a whole lot of work to try and, get all of the colleges across the United States. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. It's definitely going to be interesting. I am going to be excited, just as we journey together. Oh my gosh, I'm really loud. I'm going to be excited as we journey together to reflect theologically on what's going on in the world, because that's just what I do. Specifically with the vaccine, I don't know how many of you have heard stuff like this before, and I see stuff like this because I've gone to some deep, dark parts of the internet. But I'm excited to reflect theologically on, what does the vaccine actually mean? What does it look like? And, is it, is there something sinister behind it? There are people who are interpreting the vaccine as the mark of the beast, who are talking about, it having microchips like implanting inside of you. So I'm going to be interested to reflect theologically with all of you as we journey through this time. And as I'm out of school now, I have a lot more time to engage theologically with the world around me and not have to worry about doing assignments and stuff. So this is going to be kind of like a precursor trial, and then I have some stuff in the works for this summer where we'll be able to do more things like that. So if that interests you, or if that is making your ears tingle a little bit, be ready for stuff like that, because I want to do some stuff like that. I'm also thinking about starting some kind of summer series in addition to our roundtable, trying to do it at some point throughout the week, and calling it Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview, and talking about the philosophy that goes into helping to build our worldview, but where we get that philosophy from, how we talk about it, how we engage with it in a biblically centered way, and why it's important. Because there is one verse, it's from Paul somewhere, I don't remember where it is, but he says, don't be held captive by empty philosophies. And I've heard some people use that as like, don't use philosophy in your theology, and that's just a really dangerous road to go down. So I want to talk about it. I want to discuss it because I think we need it a lot. So it's going to be good, but that's a whole 4 or 5 months and another semester of school away. So we'll get there. I promise we'll get there. Let's start this morning. First off, good morning, by the way, to everybody joining us through the live stream as well. You kind of dropped in on the conversation that we were having before everything started, but good morning to everybody. Super happy you're here for Sunday school. I want to start this morning with just, a short time of prayer again. Does anybody have specific prayer requests? We will be praying for those who are sick, those who are struggling with the COVID virus. We'll be praying for people who are, struggling during this season of time, who probably aren't going to go get to see family and friends as they're accustomed to. Especially as, the dark of winter sets in. We want to pray for people's not only physical health, but mental and spiritual health as well. Hopefully our branch streams can be a light in dark places. But apart from that, does anybody have prayer requests? Yeah, we'll pray for the Jones family again, who had a shock the other day with one of their kids. She is doing better, last I heard. They're still watching her, but she is doing better. So that was good to hear.
The Bush family, Dr. Bush and Kelly Bush,
Okay.
with COVID, and then he doesn't have it. She did test positive,
Mm.
and then the Killingsworth are still dealing with it.
Yeah, so pray for the Bush family and the Killingsworth family. Absolutely. Good morning, Sarah. I see you online.
Praise report by Area is in a sense done with it.
Yay, that's good to hear.
The residual, little bit of drainage, but
Right, but other than that, done with it.
never contracted it.
That's huge.
She dealt with it, and 5 days, 6 days, and the Lord has healed her.
Awesome. Yeah, we will say praise for that. John's aunt and uncle, done with the COVID. Very happy to hear that. All right, well, we'll spend a few minutes in prayer together, and then we will dive back into the Christian year. Lord Jesus, we bring ourselves before you this morning, gathered together in person and gathered together virtually all over the city and maybe even all over the world. And we thank you for bringing us to this place this morning. We're thankful for the way that you work in our lives. We're thankful for just all of the ways that we see you during this Advent season. Lord, we know that this is a hard time for people, that Christmas can be a hard time for people, and then you add on top of that COVID, and then you add on top of that, darkness and just everything that's going on. And so, Lord, we bring requests before you this morning for the families that are near and dear to us, for the Jones family, the Killingsworth family, and the Bush family, all who are dealing with coronavirus specifically, the Jones family dealing with the health issues of one of their daughters. We just pray continual healing and continual working in their lives for their physical healing. Lord, for those who are struggling mentally and who are struggling spiritually during this time, we pray that you comfort them, that you bring them peace, that in whatever small part we can participate, that we can help to be a light in those dark places. But God, we pray that this time of Advent and this time of Christmas, you allow light to break into the darkness, that you allow hope to overtake despair. And so as we turn ourselves back to the Christian year, will you instruct us and teach us and shape us and form us as we sacralize our time? Thank you for this morning. Thank you for everyone who is here and everyone who's joining us through the live stream. Lord, we love you. We pray all these things in your name. Amen. All right, good morning, Tara, as well. I see you online also. All righty. Well, we have been slowly but surely making our way through the Christian year. It's been fun so far. It's been fun for me to study and to look at some of these different things. And hopefully you've taken some of the things that we talked about last week and you are using them to prepare yourselves. Last week we talked about Advent. We talked about the season of Advent. I don't know, Mia, I think maybe inadvertently, but she reminded me that we are in the season of Advent and that I need to wait and be patient because I was extremely impatient this week. And so Mia was like, you gotta wait, you gotta be patient. And I'm like, I don't want to wait, but we're in Advent, so you gotta wait. But it's good. It's a good spiritual practice, and it's a good mindset to be in for preparation and for preparing. For preparing for what is to come. And the what is to come is what we are talking about today. We're talking about Christmas just a little bit early. But one, it happens to be the next season in the Christian year that we're talking about. And two, I feel like talking about it right now is actually going to be helpful in preparing to celebrate the season of Christmas. So as we did last week, we have a short video that we're going to watch from Father Mike Schmitz at Ascension Presents. He's going to give a little take on Christmas. He's going to talk about Christmas and hope. And so we'll watch that, and then we will dialogue about Christmas, what Christmas is, what it looks like, some of the different things around Christmas, and hopefully it will prove instructive and helpful. So Bob, if you would, we're going to watch our video.
Merry Christmas, everybody. Hi, my name is Father Mike Schmitz, and this is Ascension Presents. I was thinking about this a lot. A couple years ago, I did the wedding of a couple graduates from the universities up here at Christmas time. It was a little before Christmas. And so it got me thinking a lot about, like, what is it that couples need the most on their wedding day? Like, is it they need love? Is it they need trust? What do they need? They need joy in that day? What is it they need on the wedding day? Maybe more than anything. I think what they need more than almost anything is hope. If you think about this, the last day you need to promise someone that you're going to love them is the wedding day. Because of course you're going to love them that day. The last day you're going to promise to be faithful to them is that day, because of course you're going to be faithful to them that day. But when it comes down to it, they make a promise. Why? They make a promise because they're saying, okay, I love you today. I want to be faithful to you today. But I know that the day is coming when I won't feel like loving you. When that day comes, I promise I will. And they're saying that I know I love you today. I want to be faithful to you today. But I know that the day is coming when I won't feel like being faithful. But when that day comes, I promise you, I will. The virtue of hope, I would say, is most necessary on a couple's wedding day than maybe any other time or any other virtue. Hope is not simply optimism. And I think sometimes we think that hope is just kind of looking forward to a better future, or thinking that, it's going to get better. This kind of idea that as time rolls on, it only gets better. That's not true. We know if you live for a little while, you realize that is not true at all. Things don't just get better. Actually, sometimes things get a lot worse. So being hopeful is not being optimistic that things are going to turn around, or things are going to turn our way, or things are going to get better. Hope is something different. In fact, I would say this. Hope is personal. Hope is not just kind of an idea or a feeling, it's personal. Hope is trust extended into the future. So when you have hope, what that means, you have trust right now. So it's not just kind of, I really kind of wish that it would get better. I really wish things will turn around. I'm optimistic. It's, no. I trust in a person. And I have that trust is extended into the future. So on a person's wedding day, right? Bride looks at a groom looks at his bride, and he says, no, I have hope, meaning I trust in your promise. I trust in you, and I'm extending that trust into the future. I trust who you are right now, and I trust your promise into the future. So when Christmas is a season of hope, what we're not saying is it's a season of just great happiness. It's a season that's free from pain. It's a season where everything is worked out for you. What we're saying is this is a season where we're called to have trust in a person. And we're called to allow that trust to be extended into the future. So what are Christ's promises? Well, we're saying that Jesus, in Christmas, you are Emmanuel, right? You are God with us. This is the incarnation, the Word made flesh. That St. John, in the beginning of the Gospel, he says that we saw the Father, the glory of a Father's only Son, and He came and He dwelt with us. He tabernacled with us. He lived with us. God is here, and those are the lines of Christmas. Those are the lines leading up to Christmas. The message that God is here, even in darkness and even in pain. And even when things don't go well for us, even in broken hearts and broken lives, God is here. And I trust in that God. So what we're saying and we hope is like, God, I trust that you're here. I trust in you. And I trust that you will be there when I get there. I trust that you will be here in my life, even in the future. Hope, truly, is not just a feeling, and it's not just this kind of like thing we conjure up. It's a relationship. And that's why it's so hard for people who don't have a relationship with God to have hope. Not because they don't believe that there's a God out there who loves them, not just that, but because they don't have a relationship with this God who's out there who loves them. But if you're a Christian, that means you're celebrating on Christmas the truth, the reality, the belief that God Himself is here with us, and that you can have a relationship with Him, that you trust Him. You trust that He's been there, that He is here, and He will be there. That's hope. So whether you're in the midst of pain this Christmas season, or in the midst of loneliness and darkness this Christmas season, all of us can have hope, which is trust in Jesus, that He's here, and trust in Jesus that he will always be here. God is with you today, and he will be with you tomorrow, and he will be with you until the end of time. Live this Christmas with hope. From all of us here at Ascension Presents, my name is Father Mike. God bless.
There's an important reason that we start each Advent season with hope. We wait, we prepare for it, we remind ourselves, right, that we are people of hope. And I like how he compared it, that I think he blurs the line a little bit between hope and faith, just slightly. But I think there's a lot of wisdom there that hope is waiting, and it's putting your trust into someone specifically that when things come crashing down, I'm going to still remain faithful, right? And I think that a lot of times, especially in an Advent season, it's so appropriate for us to turn back to ourselves and to say, do I really have hope in Jesus? Do I really have hope in the Lord? When all things come crashing down, am I going to lean back, and am I going to say I choose to believe, I choose to put my faith and trust in in what you have said, in what I've experienced, in what others around me are telling me, or am I gonna turn away from that and decide to do things my own way? And so there's this tension that happens inside of the Advent season with waiting for hope and in hoping for the things that are coming. But ultimately, once we are finished with the Advent season, once we reach the end of the Advent season on December, technically it's 25th, but it's kind of been pushed back to like December 24th at like 8 or 9 p.m., depending on when you do your Christmas Eve service. We celebrate Christmas. We celebrate the fulfillment of the things that we have been waiting for. We celebrate that, I was preparing for hope. I was waiting for peace. I was expecting joy. I was waiting in love, and all of these things became fulfilled. All of these things happened on Christmas. And so Christmas is literally the long-waited time is finally here. If Advent is preparing to meet your God face-to-face, then Christmas is the time when God shows up, meets you face-to-face, and says, hi, here I am. Look me in the face and, have a glowing face also, because that's what happens to people. So it's the long-awaited time. It's the fulfillment of time. But even beyond fulfillment, I think that this is a particularly important time of wonder and amazement. The Christmas season is meant to be a time for us to marvel at the incarnation. And I was really struck by this week, and you're probably going to hear a lot about it because it's in my notes a lot. But the whole point of the Christmas season, we've made it so much about gifts, right? It's all about gifts. It's all about giving. It's all about loving people. And it's all about this, that, or whatever. But for me, when you start really boiling down and getting to the theological depth of what is happening during the Christmas season, it really is a celebration of God emptying himself, of God taking on humanity, of God becoming incarnate inside of humanity. And that's a huge thing for us to celebrate, right? And that this whole idea of incarnation, it gets to be really important, especially as we get to Easter. Easter kind of validates the incarnation and all of the other things that come after it. But it's this Christmas day that we wait for and we celebrate. It's what all of the preparation was for. And so, maybe another way to think about this or put a spin on it, in the Advent season, we join ourselves with ancient Israel. We wait, we anticipate the Messiah. But once we reach Christmas, the waiting is over. We get to celebrate, we get to rejoice because the Messiah is here, right? He made it. he's doing stuff, and whatever he's doing, like we want to participate with it. We want to, I want to get the dirt that he's kicking up on me by following after him, because he's out there and he's doing stuff, and we're celebrating that. And so I think Christmas has a potential to be a really awesome and powerful season. However, before we dive into some of the specifics about Christmas, I think that for us specifically living in 21st century America as evangelical Christians, there are barriers that are in place that really prevent us from celebrating Christmas, like truly and honestly celebrating Christmas. There are 4 barriers actually that I'm going to share with you, and again, if I feel a little bit nitpicky, just remember that I'm a 6 and that's how it is. So the first barrier that I think really prevents us from celebrating Christmas is over-familiarity. We start moving, like once we get past really Thanksgiving, the things around the year start to seem really familiar to us, right? They're kind of just the same as they've always been. We sing the same Christmas songs. You might hear the same Christmas sermons. Your family probably has the same Christmas traditions, right? You hear the Christmas story. I remember growing up every year, my mom remembered a song that she did in a kid's VBS type Christmas pageant thing, and she would always start singing it. It's like the beginning of Luke 2, and it came to be in those days that Caesar Augustus issued a decree. And we remember those words because we read it every year. And so we start to become very familiar with it and potentially even over familiar with it. And we start to hear these things, and I've talked with a couple of people about this before, but when you hear the same thing over and over again, you eventually just start to tune it out, because you're so familiar with it. And so it takes concentrated effort to actually focus on something that you're overly familiar with. So that's the first barrier. The second barrier for us truly celebrating Christmas is sentimentality. And by that I mean it's the touchy-feely, just everybody be happy and peace on earth stuff that we have a tendency to latch onto, I think, too much during the Christmas season. Some examples of this are cliche greeting cards, right? You send a greeting card that, is like, we want nothing but peace and well-being and happiness for you and your family, and you send it to your neighbor and you're like, but you better keep your leaves off of my lawn, bud. It's cliche greeting cards. It's nostalgic music that we listen to that we're like, it gives me this happy emotional feeling, which is why those people who listen to Christmas music in July are, they listen to it and they're like, it just makes me happy and it gives me that happy feeling. It's the excuse me. It's the sentimentality. We've boiled the manger, we've taken the manger scene and everything that it represents, and we've boiled it down to just this sweet little manger scene, and you have the little animals and they're just resting there, and you have the baby Jesus and everything's sweet and it's all nice. And ultimately, this leads us to a watered-down holiday ethos, right? We've taken the grand emotions, the grand feelings of joy that are meant to be experienced at Christmas, and we've watered it down so that way we can stomach it every year, because it's just all sweet and niceness and happiness, and it doesn't really seem to intersect with our reality at any other point in time. And so sentimentality is the second barrier preventing us from celebrating Christmas. The third barrier preventing us from truly celebrating Christmas is commercialism. And no, I don't mean to sound like Charlie Brown here, but they got this absolutely right. The commercial eclipse of Advent, the whole, the Christmas ads that start the day after Halloween that start saying, buy all these things now. Black Friday has become a national war fest among people who go out Black Friday shopping, and they're nuts. They're absolutely crazy, but it's this commercialism, the commercial eclipse of Advent that has taken over our world. This is also compounded by the reduction of Christmas to a single day. If you take the entirety of Christmas and you focus it in on one singular day, you're saying, I'm preparing, I'm going to buy, I'm going to do all of these things, right? I'm going to spend until we get to Christmas, and then finally the spending can stop, right? And, we finally reach the climax, the high point where the spending can stop until you get all the Christmas monies that people have given you, and then you can go spend some more. And like we've made Christmas like this like high point where it's been boiled down to a singular day. And really that doesn't serve Christian purposes, that serves commercial purposes. And so that's barrier number 3, preventing us from celebrating Christmas. But the 4th barrier, and this is where I start to get really nitpicky, the 4th barrier that I think really prevents us from celebrating Christmas is the little phrases that we like to throw out, right? Oh, what's the true meaning of Christmas? Or this one just really irks me. Keep Christ in Christmas. Or, oh, they're taking Christ out of Christmas. Like, that bothers me to my core. And the reason why is because little statements like that, I think, show us our hashtag and meme-centered culture, where we want to try and solve arguments with, like, hashtag I'm blessed, or, hashtag keep Christ in Christmas. But, like, that's the whole argument. And, like, latching on to phrases like that, it gets us dangerously close to just skating over the surface of this incredibly deep and rich tradition that we have. And so those 4 big barriers that we come face to face with every year are huge things to be important, or huge things to be aware of as we prepare to celebrate the Christmas season: the overfamiliarity, the sentimentality, the commercialism, and the phrases. And so, we've talked about these things, and I might have just notched a few little axe swings in your Christmas ideal, but I'm here to tell you this morning that Christmas is meant to be about more than just this. It's meant to be more than just the presents. It's meant to be more than the phrases. It's meant to be more than just sentimentality. It's meant to be more than commercialism. But it's our invitation to inhabit the beginning of the Christ story more fully. It's our invitation to deeper theological reflection on God and on God's incarnation. It's truly our time in the year to focus on a passage like Philippians 2, where Paul says, that Jesus, though being in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be held on to, but rather emptied himself, took on the humility of being a servant, came to serve people, right? Or if you're thinking about it philosophically, Jesus himself came, he put on humanity. He somehow managed to crunch divinity inside of humanity, and he took on the human nature, and he lived and he dwelled among us. And we start to reflect on these deeper theological truths of, this is a God who loved us so much, not just to send himself down to suffer for a week and then to die, but loved us enough to leave divinity behind, to enter into humanity, to live, to struggle with us, and then to suffer and to die, only to be resurrected. This season of time should give us pause, should make us stop and think about a God who is so willing, is so ready to leave behind the things that we would consider divinity in order to grasp fully onto humanity. And this is just kind of like a disclaimer. Whatever your theory of incarnation is, because there's several out there, whatever it is, I think that this should cause us to reflect just in generally on, what does it mean that Jesus is God and man? What does it mean that Jesus is fully God and fully human? He's truly God, he's truly human. How do those two things mesh together? Because we're presented with it every single year on Christmas, that Jesus Christ, the Messiah, was born a baby, a human baby, and lived among us. And those who followed him after he was crucified and resurrected, they believed that he was God. And so what do you do with that? How do you fit that into your worldview? Because it's important. There's a quote that I want to read to you. It's by a guy named Lawrence Stuckey. And this is what he wrote about Christmas. He said, "Christmas is the enfleshment of God, the humiliation of the Most High, and divine participation in all that is painful, ugly, frustrating, and limited. Divinity takes on humanity to restore the image of God implanted at creation but sullied by sin. Here's the great exchange Christmas ponders, that God became like us, that we might become like God. God accepted death that the world might accept life. The Creator assumed temporality to redeem creation from futility. And there's a lot packed into there, but this is what Christmas invites us to ponder. This is what Christmas invites us to consider. And so as you think about some of those things, I want to turn briefly just to talking about, Christmas in church, some cultural traditions that happen every single year that, you're probably familiar with some of these. And again, if I start to wreck your idea of Christmas, I apologize in advance. But this is just what I do sometimes. So the first Christmas tradition, let's start with the date, December 25th, right? This date of Christmas is strange a little bit the more you start to dig into it, because it appears as though the earliest Christians, like those who were Jesus' disciples and apostles and a couple of generations after them, they gave very little thought to Christ's birth, probably because they were so focused on his death and his resurrection and trying to figure out what they do with that. And so you don't really have a whole lot of focus on the date for Christ's birth until the year 336. So, almost 300 years after Christ is died and resurrected is when we really have this first date of December 25th popping up as Christ's birth date. Now, this date is interesting because it's probably not the day that Jesus was born on. Many scholars believe that it was probably sometime in March, or sometime around in the late spring, early summer period, and they talk about this by you have shepherds that are out in the field watching over their flocks at night. You're not going to do that in in first century Palestine when it's freezing cold in the middle of December. Like, you just don't do that. And so there's little things like that that push people to think okay, maybe it was a later time, maybe it was a warmer time. For that. But December 25th is ultimately the date that the church decided on. And this is for a couple of reasons, potentially. Some people think that the December 25th time frame is to counter two festivals that the Romans had. One of them is called Sol Invictus, which means the unconquered sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N. But it means the unconquered sun, and it was a day where the Romans would... They would celebrate. It was declared during the day of the winter solstice, and so this was meant to be like the day of the birthing of the sun god, because it was the winter solstice is the time when the sun is up in the sky the least, and so for them for like the sun cult that celebrated Sol Invictus, the sun was waning every year from the spring equinox to the winter equinox, and then you celebrate on this day like the sun's rebirth, and then from there it's just getting bigger and stronger until you get back. And so you have potential that the church is trying to counter the Sol Invictus again and I think Bobby Gross is pushing this just a little bit, but he presents this that scholars are potentially saying that the church is presenting the celebration of Jesus' birth as against Sol Invictus as the Son of Righteousness from Malachi 4:2. Again, I don't know that I buy that so much, but I think there's really good reason to think that they're probably countering the Sol Invictus. There's also another feasting that happens, or another 7-day feast that happens with the Romans that was called Saturnalia. It usually took place from December 17th to December 23rd, and this was in honor of the fertility god. Again, it's kind of like a season of preparation for them. You fast for 7 days while the winter is here, while things are dead and are gone, so that way in spring, when you start planting, when you start getting ready for the harvest, like things will be good, and you can start having children in the spring, when things are supposed to be like that. So the date December 25th, it probably has something to do with some of these things. Again, it was a way for the early Christians probably to celebrate, light coming into the world, light breaking into darkness. It's also a way for them to turn away from pagan festivals and to keep their light really focused on Jesus. Now, what's interesting about this is this date has actually been like a point of tension for Christians among the years, and I had no idea about this. But Christmas itself actually did not fare well during the Reformation. The Calvinists condemned it, as did people like John Knox in Scotland. The English Puritans opposed the excessive entertainments promoted by different monarchs. And the British Parliament under Oliver Cromwell declared December 25th a fast day and actually forbade all decorations and festivities and even services at church. They didn't want any celebrating or any part of this. They saw it as a really, as a really bad thing for their country and for the church. And so you have this sort of evolution of Christmas being taken, like the Catholics celebrating it, but the Reformation people saying, we don't want to be anything like the Catholics, and so we're going to put off everything, including Christmas, in order to be un-Catholic. So we can be thankful that we're more Catholic now when we celebrate Christmas. Hurrah. So that's the first Christmas tradition, is the date. The second one is this idea of a gift giver, or as he's more commonly known, Santa Claus. Right? Maybe you've heard this story before, but Santa Claus is not just a fictional, made-up character. The image of him that we get, the flying reindeer dude that lives in the North Pole, that's fictional. But Santa Claus himself was a real person. He was named Saint Nicholas. He was the bishop of, He was the bishop of Myra, was the head of that church and actually died in 343. And I think I told you this a couple of weeks ago, but one of my history teachers at Vanderbilt had a background where we know where St. Nicholas's tomb is. So if you're ever needing to take your kids down a few pegs and be like, oh yeah, Santa's dead, I can show you his tomb. It's a powerful weapon. Be careful when you use it. But this St. Nicholas guy, he was known for legendary generosity, specifically towards children who were in need. There's a story of him giving stuff to a shipping merchant, specifically a dowry to a shipping merchant who had 3 unmarried daughters. And, as each of them was getting married, St. Nicholas provided dowries for all 3 of this man's daughters. The tales of this, are, they differ depending on where you're at, but he intervenes by dropping bags of gold over a windowsill, and it's said that one of these bags fell into one of the socks that was being hung up to dry. And so you have St. Nicholas becoming the patron saint of children and also sailors. In the Eastern Church, there's actually a feast of St. Nicholas on December 6th, and so St. Nicholas's feast occurs right at the beginning of Advent. And you still have people in some Eastern Christian traditions that will leave socks out on December 6th, waiting for St. Nicholas to drop something over the window for them. Naturally, this character of St. Nicholas evolved over time. He looks a little bit different depending on where you are. In 1809, you have Washington Irving take this St. Nicholas figure who is very generous. He augments him into a figure of a man with a flying horse who drops gifts down chimneys. And so now instead of dropping them through the window, now he's dropping them through chimneys. In 1823, you have Clement Clark Moore's poem, The Visit of St. Nicholas, or it's also called The Night Before Christmas, introduced the idea of the sleigh and the reindeer, and he moved Santa to the North Pole and moved the visit back one day to Christmas Eve instead of on Christmas. And then you have a series of Thomas Nast illustrations for Harper's Weekly in 1863. This is where you start to have Santa being made round and white-bearded, and he starts to have the red and the white, and he specifically is given the North Pole address. And then in 1921, Coca-Cola sort of completed this modern image of him with an advertisement. And so Santa goes from being, a patron saint of children and sailors to, the gift-giving, sleigh-riding, cokehead. Yes, basically. So that's Santa Claus. That's where he comes from. The last really kind of important Christmas tradition that I want to touch on are the 12 days of Christmas. And this is one of the things that I love to harp on just because of what we talked about a little bit earlier. But the idea of Christmas is a whole season. It's not just one day that we we don't just celebrate Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. But Christmas is meant to be an entire season. It spans 12 days long. And if you've ever heard the song, The 12 Days of Christmas, I encourage you this year to take a little bit of time and go on the internet and look up the Christian interpretation or Christian understanding of the 12 days of Christmas, because people have done some serious work about taking all of the things that are talked about in the 12 days of Christmas and being like, oh look, this is all about gifts that God gives to the church, or something like that. So 12 is 12 disciples or 12 apostles, 4 is the 4 gospels. I think I've mentioned this before, but go and look that up. But so Christmas is 12 days. It's a whole season. And it spans from the beginning of Christmas on December 25th all the way to January 6th, which is the start of Epiphany, which, if you'll remember from 2 weeks ago when we talked about it, is the day that Christians initially celebrated Jesus' birth and baptism. It's the day that people, were participating and were celebrating the day that Jesus it became apparent that Jesus was the Son of God through his baptism, and then, Christmas got pushed back a little bit. Now, the first 8 days of these 12 days in super highly liturgical churches, and this is not us, we're probably not going to do something like this, but in the first 8 days, you have what is called the Octave of Christmas. And this Octave of Christmas, it reflects Jewish traditions of extended feasts, and there's actually there's feasts on the first 8 days of the Christmas season. So December 24th and 25th, you have the Christmas Eve and Christmas Day feast. On December 26th, you have the feast of Saint Stephen, the first martyr of the Christian faith who was killed. You have on December 27th the feast of St. John, the beloved disciple who was exiled to the island of Patmos. And then on December 28th you have Commemoration of the Holy Innocents. And this is a day of feasting, but it's also a day of remembering the innocents who were slaughtered by Herod, who was looking for Jesus and was like, oh, there's going to be a guy who comes and takes over as king. Let's just kill all the babies. That should solve it. And so there's actually a day inside of the Christian year to celebrate these things. And I want to point this out because I thought this is really cool too. The December 26th, 27th, and 28th, those feasts, they represent sort of an entire picture of martyrdom. It's people who were, where was it? It's people who were voluntarily taken and executed. People who were people were voluntarily taken and executed as Stephen. People who were taken voluntarily but were not executed were John, right? Because John wasn't killed; he was just exiled to the island of Patmos. But then you have people who were not voluntarily taken, or who were involuntarily taken but were executed. So the children, the holy innocents. And so you actually have a full picture of martyrdom here happening on these 3 days. And then on the 8th day of the feast, on January 1st, the first day of the Roman year, there is what's called the Feast of the Holy Name. And this is the 8th day after Christmas, the 8th day after Christ's birth. And this follows with the Jewish law of 8 days after your child is born, you need to go and have them circumcised, and that is when you name your child. And so you have on January 1st, which again, I think this is remarkable how all this lines up. The very first day of, the Roman year is the day that we celebrate, the naming of Christ. So it reminds us not only of the Jewishness of Jesus, but it's also fitting that we start each secular year by meditating on the names given to Christ as Jesus, which means he saves, or God specifically in this case saves, or Emmanuel, God with us, right? It's a time for us to focus on the different names here that are given. And so you have the 12 days of Christmas happening there. So those are just some of the traditions. I want to point us briefly to just the Christ story inside of Christmas, which again, over familiarity, I know you all know the Christ story, but just pointing out a couple of different little things. There's 3 different accounts of Christ's birth that we get from the Gospels. Mark is the only one that doesn't have, a birth narrative. So, in Luke 2, you have Jesus being highlighted as entering into human history. You have humble origins, right? You have Jesus in the manger. You have Mary singing this amazing song. You have him and Zechariah, or you have Zechariah and Elizabeth. They have a child, and then that's, their child is great, but it's not as great as this Jesus guy who's coming after him. And so you have this contrast here that's happening. In Matthew, you actually get, the Jesus story being born, but Matthew's the only one that records the Magi, right? And so in Matthew, you have this great sign that's being given to the rich and being given to the powerful, which don't usually fare well in Luke. But it's being given to the rich and the powerful, but also to the foreigners, right? Jesus is going to be a light to the nations. He's going to be a sign for all people that these things are happening. And so you have that contrast that we get inside of those stories. But then probably my favorite, just because it's one of my favorite passages in the scriptures, is John chapter 1, right? In John, you get this super high Christology where in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was with God in the beginning. And through him all things were created that have been made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. And you have Jesus is the light of the world. It's the light become flesh. And John doesn't go through like the whole infancy story or the whole birth story or anything, but he prologues his gospel with this by saying, there was this great light, there was this great word that came into the world, that took on flesh and that dwelt among us. And so for me, the infancy narratives are great and they're wonderful. And one thing that you can do that we're going to talk about here in just a second to inhabit Christmas is to read the infancy narratives in Matthew and in Luke and to imagine yourself in the position of the characters, right? What is Mary experiencing when an angel shows up to her and says, hey, guess what? You're going to have a baby and you've never slept with anybody. And she's like, whoa, that's really weird. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. Go and pay attention to the details. Mia and I were talking about this I want to say it was last week. It might have been 2 weeks ago. But when you think about the Christmas story, one of the things that has been really highlighted in our modern time is the innkeeper, right? There's the innkeepers keeping room at the inn. There's actually no innkeeper in the gospel stories, where like when you show up, Luke records it really shortly and Matthew records it really shortly too. Like they show up to this town and the word that's translated inn can also be translated upper room, which brings about a whole bunch of different interpretations that if you're interested we can talk about later. But there's no innkeeper. Like they show up and it's like there's no room for them, and so they go to the stable portion and Mary gives birth. And that's it. And it's just like, and we, like, in our modern conception, like, we've just taken this innkeeper and we've inserted them into the story when there's no innkeeper there. So I encourage you to, to read through the Christmas story. Don't just assume that we know what's going on, but, like, sit down and read it and sit with the text this Christmas and be like, what is Luke saying? What is Matthew saying? What is John saying? We're going to on Christmas Eve service on December 24th, we're going to walk through the Christmas story together. We're going to do it through scripture reading. We're going to do it through songs. We're going to do it through maybe one other thing. But there's going to be candles. It's going to be great, beautiful. Please show up for that. But we're going to actually walk through the Christmas story and be like, what do these things mean? What do these things look like? We're going to sit with the details. We're going to take time to do that. But the Christ story in Christmas is huge. And again, depending on what gospel writer you're reading, they all highlight different things and different themes from this. So look at the Christ story inside of Christmas and remember that this is the beginning of the Christ story. We were preparing, we joined with ancient Israel, and now the fulfillment has come. Now Christ is here, and we're celebrating that. And so with the last minute or two that I have, how do you inhabit the Christmas season? How do you actually live the Christmas season? Well, the first and probably biggest thing that you can do, and this is going to be weird to everybody else around you, I promise, but this is one really cool thing you can do, is you can stay in the Christmas season after December 25th passes. So by this I mean keep up your tree and decorations until the end of the season on January 6th, right? Continue to light candles each night to show the light of the world, right? Have a leftovers party on December 26th for your friends and neighbors. Maybe don't do that this year. But in the next few years, bring your friends and your neighbors and your church people over and have a feast on December 26th or on the 27th or on the 28th or on January 1st. Have a feast, right? Continue to celebrate it. Maybe maybe if you don't have kids, this would be a little easier, but save some of your gift giving for the 12 days, right? Spread it out a little bit. We can pattern our lives after the Jews who celebrate Hanukkah. They get one present every day for 8 days, which I think is kind of cool. It's doing little things like that just help keep you in the season and remind ourselves, like, Christmas didn't end on December 25th. It's a whole season. We're celebrating it all the way until January 6th. Like, it's an important thing to do. So that's the first one you can do. The second thing you can do is you can engage in spiritual reflection, right? We talked about this earlier, but think about God's incarnation in Jesus Christ. Think about the birth of Jesus. Immerse yourself inside of the narratives of Matthew and Luke. What are these characters thinking? What are they feeling? What does it look like to actually hold the one whom you said has been the child of God, or like the son of God, but they're crying like a baby because babies cry. What do you do? How do you reconcile that in your mind? Like, how does that work? So do those things. The third thing you can do is, Bobby Gross calls it practicing self-love, but really what he means is practice this Christmas giving or this Christmas love, but extend it throughout the season, right? Everybody says, Christmas is the best time of the year because everybody's nice and everybody's doing all these great and wonderful things, and it's true. Like, there's just something about Christmas that people just want to be nicer to each other. But as Christians, let's start practicing that throughout the rest of the season and throughout the rest of our lives. But we can take specific time during the Christmas season to really practice this giving and this love that happens at Christmas time to say, I'm not done celebrating yet. The joy is here, and we're going to celebrate, and it's going to be awesome. So let's practice that. And then the last thing that we can do is identify ourselves with Jesus, right? Specifically, January 1st, when you have the naming ceremony, we can maybe take that time on New Year's. We can take that time during the Christmas season, and we can understand that the names that we have, not individual names, but the name that we have as Christians, again, literally means little Christs or Christ ones. And so maybe January 1st is a great time for us, instead of making New Year's resolutions, is a time for us to participate in a naming ceremony and to say, we're taking on again this year the name of little Christ. Right? I'm identifying myself with Jesus completely and wholeheartedly. I am a Christian. It's just what it is. And so those are some really good ways, I think, for you to inhabit the Christmas season. Yeah. Anybody have questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, or anything else? That's true. It just says the Magi. Yeah, right. That's why they assume there's three, because there's three gifts. But they're actually not even called kings either. They're called Magi.
And so you're talking about some of the cliche quotes from Christmas. I'm a big fan of the Christmas Carol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that brought to mind, because we watched yet another version last night, when Scrooge says, "I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach." And it goes on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That part, I like that. I will honor Christmas in my heart and strive to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, the great Christmas Carol quote from Scrooge. It's definitely interesting. Anybody else? Anything specific? All right, we went like 5 minutes over time, which is okay because we don't really have anything to do in this block of time. Yeah, but thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for joining us. Panina, hello, online. I saw you join in there. I just was going and I didn't want to stop, but hello, I see you. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I hope you'll join us in 20 minutes for our worship service this morning, where we remain in the Advent season, but we are preparing, we are hoping, we are waiting with joy this morning. And I'm very excited for I'm just excited. It's going to be a good morning. So thank you all. We'll see you in just a little bit.